back when this one was still at Allen High School, I wanted to have a long-term project for him, something beyond schoolwork, and something that would teach things like project management and how to organize information, how to build up that knowledge over time. And we started a creative project, and that led to a series of things. Let's see if this works. There you go. Thank you, sir. That led to a series of projects where we published a set of what are called webisodes, which were 10,000 word stories that were the beginning of our series. It was ultimately the first half of the book. And what we ended up doing is getting in touch with the artist who did our book covers back when we were working with Timberwolf Press, Ron Miller, who's internationally famous, and he's had over 100 books of his own that he's published. He has artwork that's everywhere from the Smithsonian to museums around the world. He designed postage stamps. He's had a postage stamp that went into space to Pluto. So he's a very, very well-known space artist and book cover artist, and a dear friend. And I had at one point was working with him, and he said, "Can I send you a book?" Oh no, everybody was sending me manuscripts at the time, and he sent it to me, and it was frankly amazing. I sent it to Sir Arthur C. Clarke, who's a famous writer, and is that better? He sent it to Sir Arthur C. Clarke, and Sir Arthur C. Clarke wrote me back on a form letter that said that I'm too old now to answer individual questions. However, he handwrote on the back of the form that Ron Miller is unfairly talented, which I promptly sent to Ron, and he got a kick out of that. But Ron has been doing our book covers. This is the cover for the first book in our series, Accipiter War. And the general idea is we wanted to talk about a current day Texas city. We wanted to talk about the people in it. We wanted it to be a very character-focused story. So we built a set of characters, and we thought about an idea, and that was what happens if you take those people and take them out of their where they are? What if we move them somewhere else? And we played with a lot of different ideas, and ultimately ended up with the story in Accipiter War, where our cast of characters, the entire city and the nearby military base are essentially scooped up whole and wake up all together at the same time, and they are the city and military base have been moved off of Earth into a hollow world, which leads to their adventures throughout the first book. And we planned a 5-book story arc. We are currently working on book 5. The webisodes that we did, we created for those. We built our cast of characters. For each character, we did a set of dossiers, and we put together character art. So we would basically, where did they go to school? What's their background? What are their physical characteristics, and so on. And so Blake was responsible for some of those characters in terms of developing them, originating them, and then following through with them. Blake, do you want to talk about that process?
I think the part about being character-driven is really important to focus on, because that's not how a lot of stories are written, especially today. Stories today are often written, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but are often written in terms of, well, I've got this great story I want to write, so what do the characters need to do in order to make that story happen? So I know that this scene's going to happen, and then this scene's going to happen, so what do the characters do to make that come true? We took the opposite approach. Write the characters, make them real people with hopes and flaws, and have them go on a journey that they drive. So when we say character-driven, what we mean is that we had a rough idea of kind of what was going to happen over the course of the books, but we've really tried to make sure that the characters decide that course, that they do what Leo Talib would do. All the time when we talk through scenes, we don't decide what happens next. We put the characters in the room. We used to have a wall with all of their pictures on it, and those three would be in the room, and no, this person wouldn't put up with that. This person would jump in and do that. And all the time, we'd be surprised that something we thought would happen one way, no. Chilton jumps in, and she does something we don't expect. And we kind of hope that brings life to the characters, but I think it also makes the story a more human story, because we didn't really write the story, we wrote the characters, and the characters played out the story.
Well, the unfortunate aspect of that is that they don't always behave. Sometimes they behave quite badly, and sometimes they even manage to get themselves exiting stage left out of the story entirely. Sometimes rather emotionally, for me at least. I was telling Blake earlier that some of these characters, it's like whenever I go back over that segment, I actually I apologize to them. I'm sorry, but you did that to yourself. So some of the characters that I kind of thought would have a long run in the story didn't. So it's so like Blake said, it is very character driven. So often in today's storytelling, it's like, and this happened, because the plot needed it to happen. So I mean, it is a challenging process.
But one of the things that also opens the door for, when we only had book one and we would explain it to people, I can't tell you how many times we got, oh, so it's Under the Dome, or insert story where people are put in this isolated situation, and we would always groan when we got that, not because it's not that, although it isn't that, but because in most of those stories, and most stories that are written about the apocalypse, zombie apocalypse, or whatever the end of the world is, most of those stories are written with a very pessimistic view of human nature. People just instantaneously start betraying each other and stealing from each other, and nobody works together, and civilization completely collapses. But human beings aren't really like that. Sure, some people are, but we're also capable of amazing things, and we're capable of building things and surviving horrible calamities and coming together to rise above situations. And so we wanted to write a story, with real people, and real people don't act like those stories where people just constantly stab each other in the back. People come together, and sure, there is betrayal, but that's not the main theme. That can make it interesting in the story, but that's not how people are.
It was several 100,000 years ago, there was a bottleneck in human population where human population diminished down to something like 12,000 total humans on the planet. And we came back from that. We've been through, as a race, we've been through so much. We've accomplished so much. We've as one of our characters is fond of saying, we clawed our way out of the mud as a race. And I wanted our story to, have a positive outlook on human nature in general, as a rule, and bring us forward. And I did not want to have, your usual Lord of the Flies, bad situation. So, as I said, we developed characters, we built dossiers, and then we put them through different scenarios. We built a city. We designed a fictional city, called Fort Brazos. And amazingly, there is no Fort Brazos. You would think that there would be in Texas, but surprisingly, there is not a Fort Brazos, Texas. Well, there is for us.
You'd be amazed how many people stop by at Comic-Con. Oh, yeah, I know that place.
Oh, yeah, exactly. People, yes. Thank you. That always is funny. So we designed a whole city as a setting. We designed a military base, a joint reserve military base, and it's a blend, of Fort Hood and other aspects, just like Fort Brazos is a blend of cities, like Stephenville and Temple and so on. We wanted basically a fairly remote city. The whole idea was that we have a fairly substantial city of 80 to 90,000 people that was self-sufficient. That they were independent and were of an independent mind. And then we built a world, the world that they end up in, a hollow world. It's 4,000 miles long. It has oceans and continents. It's an entire world inside a bottle, as it were. We built a map of that world and decided, where certain things would be, where the city ends up, what the geography is, and we set that up in the very beginning before we even started going to any of those places, so that they would be there. And as the story has started to unfold in the subsequent books, our characters have started to explore both inside this world and outside the world as well.
And mapping software, by the way, is really good at making a map around a big sphere, because the Earth is a big sphere. So mapping software to map the inside of a cylinder is not very easy. So these maps took a little bit more effort than you might expect.
We also took a cinematic approach to our story. We created a storyboard for the first book. We mocked up scenes, created artwork, and really it was for our own inspiration. Nobody's really ever seen this, some of this stuff before. I went digging because Tom asked me to bring pictures. So we brought this for you. And this kind of helped us to, visualize some of these scenes in our mind. And it evolved over time, and it changed as characters did their thing and refused sometimes to cooperate entirely. These are the covers from the original webisodes that we did, which were roughly the first half of the first book. The first book is about 120,000 words long. Each of these were about 10,000 words long. So we created our own artwork for these and then released them online. Got a lot of feedback, and that led to us building, taking these and refining them and finishing it as the first book, which you see here. Also, Blake is a classical composer and pianist, and he created an album of music and has since released other music as well. But he created theme music for us. We had a lot of talks about how this particular scene or portion of the book, what did it feel like? What was the theme for it? And so, do you want to talk about that a little? I know you don't. You were very young when you did this. He released his first album when he was 14 years old.
I would say I'm a mediocre classical composer, but there really is a utility in creative endeavor in attacking it with different senses. There's in cinema, for example, a director will create a scene with all sorts of different sensory elements. Some directors emphasize soundscape, the soundtrack. Think John Williams in Star Wars, Hans Zimmer in Interstellar. They create this world out of sound. Some use visual things. And I think, there's a cinematic quality to a lot of music. And so I think that especially at the time, we kind of used that to create this image and this feeling in our head of, what the scene was set as, especially in book one. And, it's the end of the world. It's very emotional. And so, by bringing out, and I played a lot more piano at that time, by bringing out those emotions in another aspect of my life, we were able to apply that emotion a little bit more inside the world that we built.
Also, because he made this music and it gave that theme, then as I was working and traveling and writing in the wee hours and spare time, as seems always the case for writers, I would listen to his music, and it would help inspire me in writing different scenes of the story. So, as I mentioned before, I called Ron Miller. We collaborated on the story, and Ron, being the brilliant artist that he is, we had long conversations about how do you depict what it looks like on the inside of a 4,000-mile-long, hollow, cylindrical world. In the short version, it ain't easy. The perspective is hard to visualize. And being able to convey a sense of what it looks like is hard because no one's ever seen it before. So what does it really look like? Mapping software doesn't work. There is no software that does this. So we had long conversations about what would work, what wouldn't. And so this is the result. And I'll spare you the long technical discussion, but I think it ended up beautifully as we see the city of Fort Brazos below and the sun tube that goes down the middle of this world, 300 miles up above you, and you can look up and you see the other side of the world. You look up, you don't see stars, you see the other side of the world. So it gives you a whole different perspective. The next 3 books so far, Stealing Fire, The Forge, and Heretic. Writing them has been an emotional journey as we take our characters through that. Blake, do you want to talk about?
So I recently finished reading Paolini's Inheritance Cycle. And that's the dragon fantasy books. They're excellent if you haven't read them. But what's interesting about them is that Paolini started writing them, I think when he was 14, 15, something like that. And then he finished them in his late 20s, if memory serves. And you really feel that when you're reading them. He was very mature for his age, but that first book has that kind of wistful youth about it. And it comes through in a very positive way. And so one of the from my perspective, one of the emotional qualities of the books is that we started the first one when I was 16, 17, 18, and I'm 27 now. I got married, I've got a baby. And so, kind of having my life grow alongside the events unfolding for the characters and, the moral depth of a lot of the things that happen in the story as our characters settle into this world and start making decisions, start doing things, start doing sometimes maybe evil things and having to reckon with that after the fact. So, that journey through the storyscape has also been kind of that story of my life. And, as we get into the heavier material in book 5 and probably onwards, I definitely feel that in that way myself.
And we did originally plan it as an initial 5-book arc. As we've built it out, it was never the idea that it would be only 5 books, but it's an initial, think of it as Act 1. It's sort of getting through this phase of our overall story. that the first 5 books is intended to, get you to a certain point in this journey. And so as we work now through book 5, is this, as we bring so many of these threads together, because we have a large cast of characters that we've carried through, and they've all grown and gone through tremendous change. Well, the ones that survived, and the new ones who have come along. So it is a big journey for all of them. And Heretic, book 4, was jarring in many ways for us, because it changed things. It kind of revealed some things that we had been planning for a long, long time, and it just kind of like suddenly it all comes together. All the pieces start to line up, and you see where we've been leading so many of these story elements throughout the first several books.
Yeah, a shocking amount of the books are written during long car drives. In Heretic in particular, we basically finished the core, call it plot twist of book 4 during a 7-hour car drive back from New Mexico. So we do a lot on long car drives.
So our writing style, is one of collaboration, where I need a foil. I need I do most of the writing, but Blake, I can't do it without this collaboration where I can go back and forth and throw ideas and get them thrown back at me, and sometimes ridiculed. But it is a rich process that we've developed this story and these, and I'll emphasize again, these characters are real to us. They're alive. They are real people to us. They're that in depth, at least in our minds.
Well, and I'd mentioned before, taking a somewhat optimistic view of human nature. To punctuate that, I was talking more generally about apocalypse fiction and such, but in science fiction in particular, there's been a growing trend, I wouldn't say of anti-humanism, but an overly critical perception of what it is to be human and human nature. And, our characters are certainly sinful creatures, but we try to make it a celebration of humanity rather than a condemnation. And science fiction in particular, with the emphasis on the technological, tends to bring out the worst of people. And so I think it's been a lot of our effort to bring out a different side of that story.
So here are 3 quotes. Blake, can you read those from where you are?
Are these all from book 1? Yeah. So chapter 10, "My God, that brave son of a bitch," the veteran exclaimed as Captain Findlay struggled to control her crashing plane and avoid the high school at the last moment before ejecting.
So these are 3 quotes from book 1.
The truth is that we never stood a chance, not one, none. The Accipiters had the high ground of space and were untouchable. A little bit later, "We're trapped inside this hollow world and given an ultimatum by our kidnappers that we must fight what will likely be a generational struggle against an entrenched, galaxy-spanning enemy." That last part I'll also emphasize. We try to play on the harder side of science fiction. He explained it to me growing up because he grew up on Larry Niven and the original science fiction. Sci-fi is kind of on a spectrum. Sci-fi in the middle, you have fantasy at a far end, and you have hard science fiction on the other. And the idea is that either through technology in the case of hard science fiction, or usually something like magic on the side of fantasy, you introduce these, extra natural ways to influence the story. And sometimes you get something more like sci-fi. A popular example of that would be like Dune, where there's a lot of hard science, but there's also some pseudo-magical qualities. We try to stick on the hard side of science fiction, not because we think it's better, we just like it. And one area that we really emphasize that in is the scale of things. Space is big, really, really big. And very little fiction does anything remotely like a good idea of explaining that. You know, Star Wars, you've got the Galactic Empire, and it's got what, like 10 planets? We have a story with a galactic war, and we mean it. Millions and millions and millions of planets, billions and billions of ships, and trillions of enemies. And so, you know, trying to wrangle the scale of that is challenging, but, you know, when we say galactic war, we mean it. We really want to bring across the scale of creation in the story.
And that's one of the things that most people don't know. Like any genre, there are many subgenres. You can, you know, I don't know how many there are, but take Westerns. You know, there are a lot of, there is no one type of Western. There is no one type of mystery. There are multiple subgenres in each of these huge, broad categories, and science fiction is no different. Science fiction has a huge breadth to it that ranges, you know, from the hard to the soft. The popular stuff that's on the screen tends to be very much on the soft side, and you know, whether it's you know, I have the actual when Star Trek: The Next Generation came out, they actually accepted scripts for a while from the outside. And I have the guide for that they sent out. And one of the things that they basically say is, you know, write your story, and it literally says, insert technobabble here. Okay? So insert magic here. So insert whatever it is that needs to happen in order for that to happen here. And it takes, for us in our writing, you know, we have taken a modern, current day Texas technological city and military and thrust them into this impossible situation. So we have to do research both on current technology, but also very future technology. And it takes a long time to do that research. Tremendous amount of depth goes into that, trying to be as accurate as we can. We make mistakes like anybody does, but you know, we try very, very hard to keep it hard as much as possible. So the other thing that we are in our story is we're a mix, because we're sort of a semi-hard science fiction. And now, really hard science fiction has equations in it.
We don't torture you with that.
We have no equations in our stories. There is a series of books called from Kim Stanley Robinson, Red Mars, Blue Mars, Green Mars, I think, or something like that. And he actually has equations in his book. My brother, the mathematician, wrote to him and corrected his math. Okay, so that's hard science fiction. We also incorporate elements of something called space opera. Now, what that entails is huge, expansive storytelling, you know, against this enormous background in a futuristic space setting. That's a very bad description, but space opera is high drama, high storytelling with long plot lines and so on. So it's a very dramatic story, like opera. You know, think opera. It's a very dramatic, big setting kind of thing. Well, this is space opera. So we combine some elements of that. And there's another subgenre of science fiction called military science fiction. And that was very much popularized after the Vietnam War by Vietnam veterans coming in and writing science fiction about how horrible war is and combining that with science fiction stories. And so they would get very, very gritty in their military stories and you know, what is it really like for these, these space marine or a space grunt, fighting, a battle in the future in any way. So military science fiction in its, grittiest form. We're not quite that. We're not quite space opera. We're semi-hard science fiction. So we're a blend of those things in our storytelling. But our feeling was we wanted to make it relatable, understandable, and something that a modern audience can.
All of those things, I think, come together because we want to make it real. We want it believable. When you see something in the story, we want to explain it to the degree that it makes it, okay, I understand that. That makes sense. That's a trope in horror movies today, especially, and some novels as well. Characters just do utterly stupid things. People behave in bizarre ways that no rational person would ever do that because the story needed them to do it to make it happen. But then you also, apart from the characters, have story elements that just don't make any sense. You'll have vehicles that behave in ways that are bizarre. And maybe one or two of those instances doesn't pull you out of the story, but when you have a lot of them, it certainly can. And so we hope that by, at every single level, making everything as real as we can. Whether it's, when infantry are engaging an alien on the ground and we go into technical detail about the weaponry they use and the tactics, or we're talking about how our warp drives function and the space tactics that go into that. The purpose that serves is trying to make it real so that you don't have to suspend your disbelief. We don't want anybody to have to suspend their disbelief because the story should be believable. And I think that's why we take that approach.
So this is me. My background, I've been doing technology and technology startups, for 40 years. I've been in many industries, including publishing. Timberwolf Press was one of the most fun things that I got to do, which was a spin-off of Broadcast.com back when I helped Mark Cuban get that off the ground. One of the things that we needed to do was to publish content on the internet back when nobody knew what the internet was. And so I talked to my friend Jim Klein, who unfortunately recently passed away, into taking his science fiction novel. He built a studio and he recorded an audiobook version of it. And but he could only give me half-hour episodes. So we reinvented the radio serial in the 90s and broadcast it on the internet. It was the first audiobook on the internet. We published it under the Timberwolf imprint. We later published it in print after, actually it was still during those times. And then after, Yahoo bought out Broadcast.com and I left, Jim and I started Timberwolf here in Allen. And had a tremendous growth experience learning that industry, working with wonderful artists like Ron Miller, doing our covers, the writers who wrote the books that we published. It was, I worked both as the publisher of the company. I was also the senior technical editor. We had a great staff of extremely talented people, and we won numerous awards for our books, which we produced with a full cast. It wasn't just a guy doing, the whole thing in women's voices in falsetto. We would sometimes have a couple of dozen actors that we would record, and it was tremendous fun. And then there's this, scruffy fellow next to me.
Scruffier then than now. I graduated Allen High School 2014, 2015, so I've been in this building a couple of times. But I ran off from Allen near downtown Dallas and took a job as a web developer. Hated programming, but loved IT. So I moved out to Fort Worth, got a job in IT, worked that for several years, and now I manage the IT team at a Pro AV company called SoundPro. And I got married, had a kid, and the passion of my life other than them is, I was going to say is on the screen here, but that'd be narcissistic on this slide. Some of the former slides, I would say.
So that's us. And ready for questions.
Comments, protest. This is the library. Say what you want.
Yep.
Where is it back here? Scott, I'll come out.
Okay, the name is Sipiter. The Sipiter is a raptor, a type of a hawk. Why that name?
The principal antagonist species in the story is a galactic empire of, how do I put this, 10-foot tall avian-like aliens. And
They look like terror birds.
if anybody knows what the extinct terror bird is, I actually modeled them on the extinct terror bird.
You talk about the characters and character development and eliminating some of the characters. Was there no opportunity for redemption or rescue for these characters? It seems like, yeah, they've got some dark side or they make mistakes, but what kind of led to the decision that, okay, they got to go?
If they had to go, it's generally been something that happened beyond their control. So they would be killed in battle, for example. And in other cases, they would just put themselves in a situation where bad things happen to them.
We make the observation to each other from time to time, but both of us are history buffs, that an alarming number of Medal of Honor recipients are posthumous. And there's a reason for that. And so some of our most admirable characters, well, it follows that their bravery tends to compel them into situations. So I think, and obviously there are some occasions where we'll make a decision, but in many ways, the characters tend to get themselves killed in a very, very real sense. If you've got 5 people sitting in a situation and the monster comes in, well, which of those people is the sort of person who's going to have to do something about that. So there's a sense in which we picked that person, but there's also a sense in which that person shows their actions.
My last question has to do with your creation of your new world there inside the tube. On Earth, we have essentially a closed system with the exception of sunlight. We really don't have much in any kind of significant exchange of material between the Earth's atmosphere and outer space, because outer space is basically devoid of any particulate matter. But inside this structure, how does sunlight get in? How is there, is it everything totally recycling in there? How does rain happen? In terms of modeling what we know and expect and have experienced here on Earth, how have you been able to do that inside of a big cigar?
It's a really big cigar.
It's a really big cigar. The
technical term is a McKendree cylinder. Googling that should yield good pictures. And I'll pass it to him, but something I'll comment on is, of all of the things that we've ever had to describe about the book, this is by far the hardest. You know, we're 4 books in, and describing the setting of the book has been the most challenging, and I think that lends some fun to it. In book 1, when we describe what the characters see, they walk outside, the cloud's clear. So in a McKendree cylinder, you're on the inside edge of that cylinder. So when you look up, you see the other side of the world. So the way sunlight's handled, the abductors in this case have produced artificial sunlight by having a sun tube that runs down the center of the cylinder. So when you look up, about 300 miles that way, you're going to see that sun tube, and about 300 miles beyond that, you'll see the other side of the world. So you look up and you see hurricanes over there. Like if you've ever been on Google Earth, you look up and you don't see the blue sky anymore. You see that, and it's very disconcerting for our characters. You want to add to that?
Yeah, we designed the world specifically with different biomes, so there are everything from tropical islands to, Himalayan highs. So it's multiple, zones, and the sun tube that runs down the middle is not a continuous light source. It has day and night cycles. So, it replicates, the weather patterns, because as the world itself is spinning, enough to provide gravity, you've got weather patterns, you've got oceans, continents, cyclones, and weather, which is the same that you have here. Does that help?
It's nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
So, first question is, what do you expect for a timeline for the rest of your volumes to make it onto Audible, for those of us that don't read so much but do a lot of listening?
Currently, all 4 books are on Audible.
Fantastic. Second question, and this is more about style with the books. So for those of us that have read Tolkien, for example, a lot of character development went into the story before the story was actually being told, and it was assembled into a collection of stories called Silmarillion and Lost Tales, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is there a plan to do something similar with your cadre of people who are coming in and out of the storyline?
We have, I'll answer that one way. We actually have already written the last scene in the entire series. We actually, you wrote it. It was his idea. We have a visual scene for how, what is our final send-off for the entire series when it's done. So all of the characters, because they have a life of their own, I can't say which ones are necessarily all going to still be there by the end of the journey, because some of them do manage to go off and get themselves killed over time. Some of them, occasionally they're the ones that deserve it for ignoble reasons, which rather dramatically happened in a recent book. But most of the ones that we lose along the way are taken from us either for heroic reasons or other reasons beyond their control. As for the long term, we know what we want to do in a general sense for the storyline. We have a general, idea for wrapping up this phase of the story in the first 5 books. So we're getting to this sort of turning point. We've developed a additional plot line for another group of people within the story that have been separated from the main group, and they have to begin their own adventure. And so we have plans for what that looks like, in general. Do you want to add?
No, I think there's also a lot of room for in-universe storytelling. Lots of authors will take a part of the story or a character, and they'll write a prequel to that character's life, or there will be something that happens in the story, and they'll kind of pull that out and create a book, specifically about that. Regularly, we'll make the comment to each other, that little part that could use a little expanding. And so I think when we finish the grand arc, I think both of us will have a desire to start breaking some of those out.
The entire series, though, we have this big vision, but within that, there are the individual stories of the individual people, because each one of them has their own story. They have their own lives and challenges and struggles that they go through. So they all develop and evolve over time as they meet these challenges and deal with them in one way or another. And it not only affects people individually, but it also greatly affects the society. And there are certain plot elements that were introduced into the story that had unexpected consequences for us that created huge societal changes. So we try to deal with, we want this to feel real, not just from the big point of view, but also from an individual character point of view and a societal point of view. What does this mean for a community to be in this situation? How does life on a day-to-day basis change in this kind of situation? There's a scene where there's this group of guys, and it's a minor plot story, but a group of guys in the story, hey, God, it's the end of the world, so they all work at the liquor distributor warehouse. So it's the end of the world, so okay, we're going to board up the doors, and we're just going to sit here, and it's the end of the world, and we're in the liquor warehouse. And later, when that situation didn't exactly go very well, the guys are sitting around a table later, and one of them comments, says, "It's the end of the world. Who thought we'd have to have jobs?" So, you want to add to that?
No, I think you got that.
So we've tried to really paint a world, a picture of a world that's dynamic with people that have lives and careers, and people whose everybody in this story started out one way and have to change. Their whole life has to change. Their destinies all have to change, and some of our central characters have tremendous responsibility, thrust upon them, and they have to shoulder, the responsibility for the fate of mankind. And it's like, all I wanted was a life. I had plans. I had plans. I had a life. And now everything has changed, and now there's this whole new world and new responsibilities that I have to deal with. And, we try to deal very personally with our characters, and they're very dear to me as I write them, and as I said earlier, there are some characters that as I go back through and reread, and as I prepare and work on book 5, where it's like, I'm sorry this happened to you. I get very personally involved.
So I've got one more question. Is there a backstory and/or redemption for the Acceptors? Or is it an extinction event?
Book 4.
I got it.
Book 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Book 4.
Okay.
Usually when you have an excellent writer like Blake, there's a good teacher behind them. Can you identify any teachers that have inspired you and helped you along the way?
Well, there's a lady sitting just back there. Suzanne Cunningham was actually my English teacher in my freshman year at Lowry Freshman Center. That would have been, I guess, 2010, 2011, something like 11, 12. So she put up with me, and then he has put up with me since then.
Any other questions, comment before I go back? Yes, sir.
I guess to preface my question, have either of you read Arcadia or watched Arcadia by Tom Stoppard? It's a one set play. It focuses on the, I guess, difference and conflict between, really briefly, love and logic in stories. And so it's the difference between the feeling you have when you see somebody you love versus your ability to like calculate an angle of a triangle. Would you say that your story focuses more on love or logic?
Love.
Love.
Love, passion, responsibility. It's a totally human story. The good and bad. It's a human story.
One of the observations I have of science fiction is back in the 50s, it tried to incorporate a lot of the theories of B.F. Skinner's and positive and negative conditioning to affect behavioral changes and eliminate evil. But that seems to have left the sphere of science fiction. What would you say has been its substitute? And then secondly, in all this character development, what has been your biggest challenge?
I'll take the first if you'll take the second. A lot of psychology courses will start with Freud, and Freud said a lot of important things. Freud said a lot of stupid things, like any brilliant person, and rightfully we focus on the brilliant things that he said, but ideas evolve over time, and we kind of take, Freud's ideas about inheriting pathologies from our parents, we kind of take that for granted today when we think about psychology. We just, of course, the dysfunctions you have with your parents can manifest themselves in your relationships. That's obvious. Well, it's only obvious today because Freud thought of it then. And so we kind of take that for granted and get a little overly critical of the other things that, he taught about. Well, the same exact thing then happens with Skinner. Skinner made some brilliant observations that we largely can take for granted, but I think that the kind of the culmination of Freud and Skinner's work rests with Jung, and in particular, Jungian archetypes, because I think that before Jung, psychologists had an overly analytical perspective on human beings. They'd come fresh off the Enlightenment. The scientific revolution was, high in mind. And so, the question earlier about love and logic kind of applies there, the deconstruction of the human mind. But you can deconstruct the human mind, but that doesn't tell you what the human mind is. And Jung, in his archetypes, I think, rebuilds the pieces of those former psychologists into a way that you can actually apply to the human spirit. Because, Skinner's lessons work really well on lab rats. And maybe an HR department can do some things there. But Jung talks about real, real human elements and uses them in more profound ways. So I think that as we look at our story, we try to take that more respectful approach to our spiritual history as human beings, and not just look at the deconstruction of older psychologists, but also the Jung's achievements, I think.
And the other question was?
Your biggest challenge in character development?
There are certain mental pathologies that are hard to wrap your mind around in certain types of people, because I have to get in their heads. So it's some people are a lot easier to get in their head, and writing is method acting. You are that person. Or at least I am. When I'm writing that character, I'm in their head. So that's, to me, the biggest challenge is in different personality types, or different, maybe it's someone from a different culture, trying to better understand where they're coming from and how they would act. There are certain, I have to ask sometimes, I had, well, let me put it this way. My father had 2 boys. I had 2 boys. My brother had 2 boys. We never had a girl in the family. So I had to, when I was dealing with young girls, because there's one particular character in the story who's, at the beginning of the story is an 8-year-old girl, and I didn't really have a lot of experience with 8-year-old girls and being able to understand them, and other various characters. That's my biggest challenge, is trying to be an actor almost, and get in their heads.
I'll add on to that a little bit. Evil.
Yeah.
Evil is hard to get right, because you tend to caricature it. It's easy to think of the evil as monstrous, but the most important, human lesson is that evil is here, not there. And so being able to write good characters are almost easy in a sense. Heroism, it flows naturally. To get into the mind of evil and darkness it's brutal and rough, and it's hard to get right. It's hard to get believable, because you can write an evil character, but villains tend to be caricatures, and avoiding that is difficult.
Yeah, and bad guys don't think they're bad guys most of the time, whether they're human or not, and sometimes even they're not in the right context. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going back to the structure of the cylinder. I'm rather fascinated by it, and this whole thing is rather fascinating. I'm a science teacher, and this year I taught 8th grade science as well as 10th and 12th, but one of the things we talked about this year was space science and such. And I've been playing around with my calculator, but I haven't come up with a firm answer yet. But the volume of this is going to be substantially smaller than Earth's volume.
It's around the surface area of Mars.
Okay. All right. Well, then that's, not too different then. Just in terms of these galactic conflicts that you were talking about, is there a way for these people to come and go from this structure? Is there an exit and entry points? And, is there a core and a mantle and in this that influences various things goings on in the inside the cylinder, and any kind of exchange between what's inside and outside? Where is it positioned in terms of, is it an artificial solar system and universe also? And then finally, have you had anybody, astronomers, space scientists, any vet this and say, well, yeah, this is, this is really pretty believable, or maybe you need to change something here?
We designed the McKendree cylinder. The McKendree cylinders are, a known concept. So we built on that. We built on existing knowledge.
We didn't invent the idea of the very, very large cylinder on the inside. The concept existed before we implemented it, and certainly have a bit of our spin on it, but it's based on an existing idea.
So, in book one, as I tell people, in book one, our cast of characters find out what's happening to them and why. And in subsequent books, they are able to venture out from that world and become involved in a galactic war.
The end of book one, our cast discovers how they're going to get in and out of this world.
So, we have, we've also, over time talked to a lot of different people and had a lot of feedback. So the world itself is pretty sound.
But both of us are rabid fans of Isaac Arthur, who I think is now the president of the National Space Society. And he does a lot of it. He's a futurist. He's on YouTube, and he has all sorts of excellent videos, scientifically detailed on futurism topics. So he talks about structures like this, and faster than light travel and all of those things from a critical perspective. I think we actually have a shout out from him in one of his videos on megastructures like this. But content like that helps us to ground ourselves in reality, because the fun part here is it's kind of hard to believe, but people have done the math on the tensile strength of materials and things like this. If you have a sufficient industrial base to accomplish it, are theoretically possible. There's no known reason why you couldn't build something this big. Just because we can't doesn't mean that maybe someday we might, or in this case, our abductors did.
Any other questions, comments? Scott, I see your hand kind of halfway moving. This is like the auction house. You move that hand and you got it sold.
Sure. I was fidgeting, but okay. So why that megastructure? There's several out there that are known. For example, the Dyson spheres and the Dyson tubes, and I don't remember all of them. I got a nice survey of them listening to the Bob's Dennis Taylor series. Mm-hmm. So everybody has their reasonings for choosing certain megastructures. Why this one for your story?
I'll let him speak to kind of the author's inspiration, but I'll speak to the story reason. Yeah. The abductors of the survivors of mankind have a very good reason for hiding those survivors. The purpose is to make sure that we are not found. And if you're just going through space as a galactic empire would, and you pass through a place, well, it's just a big rock. You don't know what's on the inside, like a big geode. So the story reason is to conceal us.
Good answer.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, it is, and that is exactly the reason. We wanted a large enough playground. The abductors of these survivors wanted there to be plenty of room for them to be fruitful and multiply. And there's plenty of room inside a 4,000-mile-long world. There's enough room for hundreds of millions of people to live in there. Actually, more.
A lot more.
A lot more.
Oh yeah.
So it is, the exterior of it is disguised to look like just a big space rock.
When you were giving our first author night at the library back in 2000, I think 2, and it was basically hosted by the Teen Writers Group. And they were looking at writing as more of a, at that point in their life, the fun part of writing, the creative part of writing. That's what they were. And then you came in and basically gave them, very bluntly but nicely, the realities of discipline in writing and what I call the mechanics, the business aspects of writing. Can you recall some of the things you said that night and recall them here?
Well, I get approached frequently at book signings and events by young writers, and the thing that I keep seeing over and over again is the same thing that I saw then, which is it's a hobby. They don't know it's a hobby, but that's essentially what it is. It's a hobby, and that's fine. It's great. Enjoy it. You should enjoy it. And if you want to do more, then you're going to have to be a lot more disciplined about it. The danger that people run into is, they enjoy it and they think that it should somehow be more than it is if they don't put more into it. So if they're not willing to put the work in, and it is, people have no idea how much time it takes to put a book together. In our case, in some cases, there are genres where you can just sit and write. You don't need to do research. You can just sit and write. That's great. I kind of envy those people, I have to be honest.
Patrick and I had this fabulous conversation this week on AI and writing. Would y'all like to have him back sometime and hear what he has to say? Because I was enthralled and captivated by every word he said. But that was going to be another night for another time. I wanted to bring that up again tonight, but that would be 2 more hours. So we'll have him back another time. Patrick, Blake, Seaman, thank you all so much for being here.